I didn't make one catastrophic decision. I made 1,000 careful ones. Each of them reasonable. Each of them defensible. Each of them chosen to keep things steady, quiet, and intact. And together, they built a life that looked solid from the outside and felt increasingly hollow from the inside. I used to believe stability was a virtue. I believed it was proof of maturity, of wisdom, of having learned the lessons that reckless people never do. I believed that if I kept things calm, if I avoided unnecessary risks, softened difficult truths, postponed confrontation, everything would eventually work out. That belief shaped my entire life. I learned early how to read a room before I spoke. How to sense when honesty would cause discomfort. How to adjust my words so they landed gently, even if they lost their meaning along the way. I told myself this was kindness. Sometimes it was. Most of the time, it was fear. I feared conflict more than I feared regret. I feared disruption more than I feared emptiness. I feared losing what I had more than I feared becoming someone I didn't recognize. So when truth threatened stability, I chose stability. I chose it in conversations that ended too quickly. In relationships that felt safe but incomplete. In decisions that made sense on paper but never touched my pulse. I told myself I was being practical. I was being careful. Careful people are praised. They're trusted. They're relied upon. Over time, I became known for being steady. Predictable. Someone who didn't rock the boat. Someone who could be counted on to keep things functioning. I wore that reputation like armor. What I didn't notice at first was how heavy it was becoming. The first cracks appeared quietly. A sense of fatigue that sleep didn't cure. A dullness that followed moments that should have felt meaningful. Achievements that brought relief instead of joy. I told myself this was normal. That excitement fades. That adulthood is about maintenance, not passion. That was the lie I needed to keep going. The truth was more uncomfortable. I was editing myself constantly. Trimming my thoughts, flattening my feelings, translating what I wanted to say into something easier to accept. I was present, but filtered. And filters distort. I started losing track of what I actually believed. Not in big philosophical ways, in small, daily ones. Did I agree with this, or was I just avoiding friction? Did I want this, or was it simply available? Was this choice aligned, or just convenient? Those questions felt dangerous, so I avoided them. Avoidance became a skill. Years passed like that. Good years, according to anyone looking in. Stable years. Years without drama. I built a life that functioned smoothly, a life people described as sorted. Inside, something else was happening. I began to feel like a custodian of my own existence rather than its author. Like I was maintaining a structure I had inherited rather than building something that belonged to me. My days were full, but they weren't mine. The moment that finally unsettled me wasn't dramatic. Someone asked me a simple question: is this really what you want? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. Not because the answer was complex. Because I had trained myself not to ask the question. That realization sent a quiet shock through me. I smiled, deflected, changed the subject. But the question stayed: echoing long after the conversation ended. That night, I lay awake replaying my past decisions, not as successes or failures, but as compromises. Each one chosen to preserve stability. Each one pushing truth a little further away. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. I wasn't unlucky. I wasn't trapped. I had been choosing safety over honesty for so long that I had forgotten there was a difference. The worst part wasn't the regret. It was the recognition that I had been complicit. I had believed stability would protect me. That it would give me space to eventually live more honestly. But stability, when built on avoidance, doesn't protect you. It contains you. I began to feel a quiet panic, not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that makes you realize time has been moving without you. I imagined myself years later, still stable, still responsible, still explaining my life convincingly. And still feeling like a stranger in it. That image frightened me more than chaos ever had. For the first time, I understood something I had resisted for years: choosing stability at the expense of truth is still a choice. And choices have consequences, even when they look harmless. I wasn't ready to blow up my life. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. But I knew, with a clarity that wouldn't fade, that continuing like this meant slowly disappearing behind a version of myself that everyone trusted except me. That was the moment the internal breakdown began. Not loudly. Not visibly. But irreversibly. Once that understanding settled in, stability stopped feeling neutral. It began to feel heavy. The same routines that once gave me comfort now felt like walls. The predictability I had worked so hard to build started to resemble a corridor with no exits. Every day looked acceptable. Every decision sounded reasonable. And yet, I felt a growing tension in my body, as if something inside me was constantly bracing for impact that never came. I began to notice how often I chose my words carefully, not to be accurate, but to be safe. I softened opinions before sharing them. I avoided topics that might create friction. I delayed conversations that mattered because they threatened the balance I depended on. At first, I told myself this was diplomacy. Then I realized it was self-censorship. There is a particular kind of breakdown that happens when you realize you are complicit in your own suffocation. No one is forcing you to stay quiet. No one is explicitly telling you to shrink. You do it because it works. Because it keeps things smooth. Because it allows life to continue without interruption. And because interruption feels dangerous when your identity is built on being reliable. I had built my life around not being a problem. That realization hurt more than regret. I started to feel resentment not toward anyone else, but toward the version of myself that had learned to disappear so effectively. I resented how quickly I agreed, how easily I adapted, how automatically I chose peace over presence. The moral dilemma grew sharper every day. If I continued choosing stability, I would preserve everything I had built. The relationships. The routines. The sense of order. I would remain trustworthy, predictable, safe. But I would also continue betraying something essential. If I chose truth even gently, I risked destabilizing everything. I risked disappointing people who relied on me staying the same. I risked exposing how long I had already been living out of alignment. There was no option without loss. That's the part people don't talk about when they romanticize choosing yourself. They skip the grief. They skip the fear. They skip the ethical weight of knowing that your honesty may hurt people who didn't intend to hurt you. I wasn't afraid of chaos. I was afraid of being seen as selfish. That fear had guided my choices for years. I replayed my past decisions through this new lens and saw how often I had justified avoidance as responsibility. How often I had told myself, this isn't the right time, when what I meant was, this is uncomfortable. Comfort had become my compass. And it was pointing me in circles. The internal pressure reached a breaking point during an ordinary interaction. Someone asked me to commit to something that would shape my future not dramatically, but permanently. The kind of commitment you agree to because it seems logical, because it keeps things stable, because everyone expects you to. I felt my body react before my mind caught up. Tight chest. Shallow breath. A sudden, unmistakable resistance. For the first time, I didn't override it. I paused. That pause felt dangerous. Silence stretched. People waited for the answer they assumed would come. In that moment, I saw two futures clearly. In one, I said yes. Life continued smoothly. Nothing changed. I remained stable, respected, quietly absent. In the other, I told the truth not dramatically, not cruelly, simply honestly. And everything became uncertain. The weight of that choice made my hands shake. I said I needed time. That single sentence disrupted more than I expected. People looked surprised. Slightly concerned. As if a small crack had appeared in something they assumed was solid. I felt immediate guilt for creating that discomfort. That's when I understood how deeply stability had trained me. I felt responsible not just for my actions, but for everyone else's emotional equilibrium. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake with a question that refused to quiet down. When did stability become more important than truth? I realized that I had been living under an unspoken rule: don't disrupt what works. Don't challenge what functions. Don't risk what you've already secured. But something can work and still be wrong. Something can function and still slowly destroy you. I began to feel urgency, not panic, but pressure. A sense that time was no longer on my side. That every day I delayed was another day spent reinforcing a life that didn't fully belong to me. The idea of escape crossed my mind, but not as fantasy. As consequence. If I didn't speak, if I didn't act, I wouldn't just stay the same. I would become someone I couldn't respect. That realization stripped away my last excuse. Stability wasn't neutral anymore. It was a choice, and it was costing me my integrity. I knew the final step would demand something I had avoided my entire life. Risk. Not reckless risk. Honest risk. The kind that doesn't guarantee a better outcome, only a truer one. I wasn't ready yet to take it. But I knew, with absolute clarity, that continuing as I was would eventually break me in a way I wouldn't recover from. And that meant the life I had been protecting so carefully was no longer safe. The moment I finally chose truth, it didn't feel heroic. It felt like stepping off solid ground without knowing whether anything would catch me. I didn't wake up suddenly brave. I woke up tired of negotiating with myself. Tired of rehearsing honesty and then abandoning it at the last second. Tired of living a life that looked stable only because I kept cutting pieces of myself off to keep it balanced. That morning, nothing dramatic happened. No signs. No certainty. No reassurance. Just a quiet clarity: if I stay silent today, I will stay silent forever. So I spoke. Not loudly. Not perfectly. Not with the eloquence I had practiced in my head for years. I spoke awkwardly. Carefully. Honestly. I said the things I had been smoothing over. I admitted the doubts I had been hiding behind practicality. I acknowledged that what looked stable on the outside was slowly destroying me from the inside. The reaction wasn't explosive. It was worse. Confusion. Discomfort. Silence that didn't feel empty, but strained. People asked questions I couldn't answer cleanly. They wanted clarity, timelines, guarantees, things honesty rarely provides. I couldn't give them what they wanted. All I could give was the truth. And the truth disrupted everything. Some people pulled away immediately. Stability had been the foundation of our connection, and once it cracked, there was nothing else holding us together. Others tried to negotiate with me, offering compromises that sounded reasonable but felt like old traps in new language. Just wait a bit longer. Don't throw everything away. You're overthinking. I recognized those voices. They sounded exactly like my own. There were losses I had anticipated and losses that surprised me. Plans dissolved. Assumptions collapsed. The version of me people trusted no longer existed, and not everyone wanted to meet the person underneath. I want to romanticize that part. It hurt. There were nights when I questioned everything. When I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. When the memory of stability tempted me like a familiar drug. It would have been so easy to retreat, to apologize vaguely, to return to the version of myself that required less courage. But every time I imagined going back fully, my body reacted before my mind could rationalize it. Tight chest. Shallow breath. That familiar shrinking sensation. I finally understood what it was. That was the cost of betraying myself. Truth didn't bring peace immediately. It brought exposure. I had to sit with uncertainty without numbing it. I had to rebuild routines without autopilot. I had to learn how to make decisions without filtering them first through fear of disruption. It was exhausting. But it was real. Slowly, something shifted. Not externally, internally. I began to trust my reactions again. I noticed how my body responded when I chose alignment over convenience. I felt the difference between discomfort that meant growth and discomfort that meant self-erasure. For the first time in years, my life felt mine not because it was perfect, but because I was present for it. Regret still exists. I regret the years I spent choosing stability over truth. I regret the conversations I avoided. The versions of my life that never existed because I was too careful to let them begin. But regret no longer paralyzes me. It instructs me. It reminds me that stability without integrity is just stagnation in disguise. That comfort can be dangerous when it requires silence. that a life can look secure and still be ethically wrong to continue. I stopped asking whether my choices looked reasonable. I started asking whether I could live with them honestly. This life I have now is messy, less predictable, less impressive. It doesn't come with guarantees or clean explanations. But when I wake up, I don't feel like I'm standing behind glass anymore. I feel present. If there is a final truth in this confession, it's this: you don't destroy your life by making one bad decision. You destroy it by making safe decisions that require you to disappear. By choosing stability so often that truth no longer has a place to stand. I didn't lose everything when I chose honesty. I lost the illusion that had been slowly destroying me. And in its place, I gained something quieter and more demanding than stability: responsibility for my own life. I don't know where this path ends. I don't know what I will lose or gain next. I only know that I am no longer living on borrowed ground. I am standing in my own choices now. And for the first time, even when the ground shakes, it feels solid enough to stay.